"I'm sorry, sir, but you're not allowed to board this flight." The woman at the airline counter said it with a tight, practiced smile, like she'd rehearsed the line, never expecting it would land on a man like him. Colonel Jonathan Miles stood there, not blinking. His boots were polished, his uniform crisp, ribbons glinting under the terminal lights. But it wasn't the medals that drew attention. It was the flag-draped casket waiting outside, beneath the wing of a plane, cooling in silence. And now, the man tasked with bringing that fallen soldier home was being told he couldn't go. He didn't yell. He didn't flinch. He just asked one question. What policy stops a soldier from honoring the dead? Nobody answered. But someone behind him whispered, "Are they serious?" Then came the phones. The silence. The fire. "Thank you for being here." Sometimes, the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those. Quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now, let's take a closer look at what really happened. The automatic doors whispered open as Colonel Jonathan Miles stepped into Jacksonville Regional Airport, the sun glinting off the rows of shuttle buses outside. The familiar screech of suitcase wheels, the echo of gate announcements, and the distant laughter of children blended into the usual airport hum. But Jonathan didn't notice any of it. His thoughts were elsewhere, out on the tarmac, where a flag-draped coffin sat alone, surrounded by heat, shimmer, and silence. Private First Class Adam Reese, 21, killed in Kandahar. Just a kid. Jonathan had promised Adam's mother that he would bring her son home himself. Not through intermediaries. Not through some distant military chain. But in person. That was the deal they'd made when he knocked on her door 3 nights ago and told her the words every parent fears. Your son isn't coming home alive. That promise, that weight, was heavier than any duffel he'd ever carried in uniform. He adjusted the brim of his officer's hat and walked toward the airline counter, documents in hand. His heart wasn't racing, but something inside him felt taut. The clerk at the desk wore a plastic name tag and the kind of deadpan expression you learn after years of delayed flights and unhappy travelers. "Ticket and ID, please," she said, not looking up. Jonathan slid the Department of the Army transport orders and his credentials across the counter. The moment her eyes met the paper, a tiny pause formed, barely perceptible, but he saw it. A wrinkle of her brow, a sharp inhale, a glance sideways at her coworker. And then, slowly, her smile tightened. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, voice clipped. "There's a security protocol issue with your boarding status." Jonathan raised one eyebrow. "Just slightly. Security protocol," he said evenly. "Mom, this is a military escort assignment. You'll find all documentation in order. You're welcome to scan the barcode on the bottom right." She didn't move. Behind her, another airline agent had already leaned in, whispering into the ear of a third employee, a supervisor maybe, who squinted through thick glasses at Jonathan like he was trying to decide whether to intervene or disappear. Jonathan waited. He'd been in war zones. He'd sat across from high-ranking diplomats and foreign intelligence officers. This was nothing, but it smelled like something. Something ugly, something unspoken. By now, the line behind him had started to grow. A few impatient travelers shifted from one foot to the other, craning their necks, eyeing the man in uniform holding up the queue. But Colonel Jonathan Miles didn't budge. His posture remained perfect. His breath calm. "I need to understand exactly what policy is preventing me from boarding this flight," he said, voice low but firm. "This isn't a vacation. I am transporting the remains of a fallen soldier." The supervisor finally stepped forward. He was in his mid-50s, with the tired face of a man who'd made too many excuses in too many boardrooms. "Colonel, we understand the situation," he said with the sort of tone that always precedes the word, "but," and there it was. "But we have to follow our internal security protocols. I'm afraid we can't override them at this time." No explanation. No specifics. Just a vague wall of procedure. Jonathan stared at the man. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to argue. Because he already knew what this was. He had seen it before. Different setting. Same cowardice in a suit. A few feet back in the line, a voice rang out. That uniform not good enough anymore. The speaker was an older man, maybe mid-60s, wearing a worn USMC cap, sleeves rolled, arms crossed. Jonathan turned just enough to meet the man's gaze. The Marine nodded at him. Not a smile. Not a joke. Just a signal, I see you. The supervisor looked uncomfortable now. He cleared his throat, fidgeting. It's not about clearance, sir. It's just policy. The Marine wasn't buying it, and neither were the people around him. A woman in a red blazer leaned toward her husband. He's escorting a coffin, she whispered. They're denying him. Phones began to rise. Fingers tapped glass screens. Recording lights blinked on. The air shifted. The normal airport chatter was now tight with attention. Conversations lowered. Eyes locked on the uniformed man who hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a scene, but was being denied for reasons nobody could explain. Jonathan remained calm, but inside a familiar storm began to churn. Don't react. Don't give them a reason to escalate. Don't be the angry soldier. He had trained others in this very kind of moment. How to stay composed under provocation, how to wield silence like a blade. He glanced at the digital clock behind the counter. Every minute ticking by was another minute. Adam's body waited outside in the heat, sealed in a military transport box on the tarmac. Every delay was another insult. Then a girl in her 20s stepped out from the security line. Phone in hand, shaky voice. Excuse me, sir, she said, glancing nervously at Jonathan. Are they not letting you board? Because of... She didn't finish the sentence, but Jonathan nodded. Once, the girl turned her phone toward the camera. I'm live on TikTok, she said. People need to see this. And just like that, the floodgates broke. A younger man in a hoodie raised his phone. This man is escorting a fallen soldier, he said. And they're refusing him a seat. A woman near the windows gasped. It's trending already. The whispers became declarations. The passengers were no longer bystanders. Across the terminal, a baby cried in its stroller. But even the mother just held her phone, eyes locked on the screen, mouth slightly open. From somewhere in the back, someone muttered, already on Facebook and Twitter. And then, from the overhead speaker, attention passengers. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 732 to Denver will be delayed. Groans echoed. But no one moved, because something more important was happening here. The public was waking up. Colonel Jonathan Miles stood taller now, though he hadn't changed his stance. He didn't speak. He didn't smirk. He wasn't playing the crowd. He was just doing what every soldier does when their orders are delayed without cause. He held the line, and everyone was watching. Phones out, cameras on, silence sharpened. Across Terminal C, the ordinary rhythms of travel had collapsed. Flight announcements faded behind the hum of something else, righteous disbelief. Colonel Jonathan Miles hadn't moved an inch. He didn't need to, because now the airport itself had shifted. The moment had taken root, and all he had to do was let it breathe. The airline supervisor stepped away from the counter, trying to make a call, face pale, voice hushed. But the damage was done. Too late. The first video hit Twitter less than 90 seconds later. A young man's voice filled the screen. They're denying a U.S. Army colonel his flight while he escorts a fallen soldier. This is how we treat our heroes. Hashtag let him fly. Hashtag honor our soldiers. And then, just like that, it caught fire. At gate 17, a woman in a denim jacket looked up from her screen, eyes wide. Oh my God, she whispered, nudging her husband. This is already on Facebook. Look, CNN just posted it. A man in a business suit checked his phone, blinked, and turned around to stare directly at the uniformed colonel. Then he stepped out of the line, so did 2 more people. Then 5. Then 10. Not because they were going anywhere, but because they refused to pretend this was normal. Back at the counter, the original airline agent, who denied Jonathan's boarding, stood frozen, hands hovering over the keyboard. The camera phones recording her every micro-expression made her visibly tremble. Her voice cracked when she spoke to the supervisor's assistant. Should I go in the back? She didn't wait for an answer. She disappeared behind a frosted glass door, swallowed by the walls of policy she once stood behind. Then a deeper voice sliced through the growing tension. It was the Marine veteran who had first spoken up. He stepped forward now, his hat tilted back, arms crossed over a chest that had once worn the same medals as Jonathan's. "I've seen a lot of things in my life," he said, voice steady, calm but unmistakably powerful. "But I never thought I'd see a man in uniform get turned away for doing the one thing that matters most, bringing a brother home." No one interrupted him, because he was right. Jonathan didn't nod, didn't shift. He let the words land, because it wasn't about him. Not really. It was about the wooden box sitting outside under the sun, waiting for someone to show respect. And that was the problem. They thought they could deny the soldier, and no one would see it. But now, everyone was watching. 2 terminals over, a gate agent for a different airline checked her phone between boarding groups. Her eyes widened. She tapped a coworker's arm. "Hey, isn't that our gate?" "No," the other said, frowning. "But this is not good." The video was now on Instagram Reels. The caption read, "This man is transporting a fallen soldier's body. The airline told him no. No explanation. Just policy." The music underneath, a haunting instrumental of taps. The comments were piling in faster than the algorithm could sort them. Unbelievable. "He deserves better. My father was a vet. This makes me sick. Where's the CEO of this airline?" Back in the terminal, a teenager with purple hair and noise-canceling headphones pulled off her headset, stared at her phone, and walked up to Jonathan. She didn't say a word. She just saluted. It wasn't perfect. Her hand shook, but it was real. Jonathan, still silent, nodded once. Then came another voice, older, authority. "Colonel Miles." Jonathan turned, slowly. A man in a slim navy suit, official-looking ID clipped to his pocket, was walking toward him, flanked by the red-faced supervisor who had tried to block him minutes earlier. The man in the suit extended his hand. "Sir, I'm Ethan Graves, Senior Operations for the airline. We'd like to sincerely apologize for the confusion." "Confusion?" Jonathan echoed. Graves' smile faltered. "Yes. Well, there was a system error that flagged your credentials. We're correcting it immediately. Of course, we'll get you on board with first-class accommodations. A pre-boarding escort, if you'd like." Jonathan didn't take his hand. He looked past him, toward the cameras, toward the crowd, toward the moment. Then he said, quietly, "Let me ask you something, Mr. Graves." Graves hesitated. "Of course. If no one recorded this," Jonathan said, "if no one spoke up, would I still be standing here?" Graves opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. He didn't answer. Because everyone already knew. The Marine beside Jonathan chuckled softly under his breath. "That's what I thought," Jonathan said. But before Graves could backpedal, a new figure appeared. Clean-cut, broad-shouldered, dressed not in airline blue but in military black. His badge shimmered. "Colonel Miles," he said, voice low and certain. "I'm Major Travis Beckett, Department of the Army." Jonathan's eyebrows lifted. "I've been briefed," Beckett continued. "We're taking it from here." Graves blinked. "Wait, we were just resolving. You were just about to issue your third version of events." Beckett interrupted smoothly. "It's all right. We've arranged alternate transport." "Alternate?" Graves asked, his mouth suddenly dry. Beckett nodded. "Private military aircraft. Wheels up in under an hour. Full honors escort. Colonel Miles and Private First Class Reese will not be flying commercial." A collective murmur rippled across the terminal. The room knew. This wasn't just a correction. This was a rescue. Jonathan looked at Beckett. "Appreciated, Major." Beckett nodded. "Your country has eyes, sir. And today they used them." Jonathan allowed himself the smallest smile. Then he turned to the Marine. "Appreciate you, brother." The Marine tipped his cap. "We look out for our own." As the 2 officers walked out, not toward a boarding gate, but toward a waiting convoy, the crowd parted like a tide. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. But every camera stayed up. Every phone captured the walk. Every heart in the room remembered what it looked like when a wrong turned into a reckoning. And somewhere, under the soft metal lid of a government-issued coffin, a young man named Adam Reese was finally going home. By the time Colonel Jonathan Miles stepped off the private military aircraft into the stillness of Whitewood Memorial Cemetery, The firestorm had already engulfed the country. He didn't need a briefing. He didn't need to check his phone. He could feel it. The weight of it wasn't on his shoulders. Not anymore. It was on theirs. On the airline that made a mistake they thought would disappear under a shrug and a vague apology. It started with a 3-second clip. Just one moment, Jonathan's motionless figure in uniform, the airline agent frozen mid-keystroke, the words, "This is a disgrace," echoing from the Marine standing beside him. That clip alone crossed 2 million views before midnight. The longer videos followed, full context, full dialogue, every hesitation, every cowardly phrase from the airline representatives caught in crystal clear HD. News networks scrambled. Within hours it was trending on every platform. Let him fly. Respect our fallen. Honor in uniform. Cable news anchors read from Jonathan's biography like they were discovering a war hero, which he was. 2 bronze stars. 1 Purple Heart. One hell of a record. But none of that had mattered at the gate, and that's what burned. Veterans organizations lit up the phones. Unacceptable, disrespectful. A disgrace to every man and woman who's worn the flag. The American Legion released a statement within 12 hours. The Wounded Warrior Project called for immediate disciplinary action. A group of retired generals, Republican and Democrat, published an open letter condemning the incident. Then came the congressional response. Both sides of the aisle. Senator Grant, a soldier escorting the remains of the fallen, should never face bureaucracy, never be delayed, and never be disrespected. Senator Wallace, this wasn't about policy. It was prejudice, and we need to confront that directly. The airline's CEO issued a statement. We regret this unfortunate situation. We are reviewing our internal procedures to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. The video played behind him as he spoke. And no one bought a word of it. 3 days later, a coalition of military legal advocacy groups filed a formal lawsuit against the airline, alleging discrimination, neglect of military transport protocols, and willful emotional distress inflicted during a military assignment. The pressure didn't let up. A veteran-led boycott against the airline trended nationwide. Stock prices dropped by 14% in a week. The airline's PR team worked overtime and still couldn't control the narrative. Because this time, the story wasn't just a news cycle. It had a face, a name, a coffin, and a colonel who never raised his voice, never pointed fingers, but who stood so straight it made the rest of the country lean in. Through it all, Colonel Miles said nothing publicly. He didn't grant interviews. He didn't tweet. He didn't give statements. Because he wasn't the story. Adam Reese was. 21 years old, son of a firefighter. A kid who played high school drums and shipped out the week after graduation. Now he was coming home. Jonathan stood beside the casket as the flag was folded with silent precision. The sun caught the fabric at just the right angle, reflecting off the brass casing of Adam's military ID tag still clipped to the box. Across the yard, Adam's mother clutched a folded photograph in one hand and her sister's arm in the other. Jonathan stepped forward. No cameras. No crowd. Just a private word. A thank you, a promise kept, and one more salute as the family was given their space. The world was shouting. But here, the silence said everything. The CEO of the airline later announced that 3 employees involved were placed on indefinite administrative leave. But it didn't end there. A full investigation was launched into whether the security policy used to block Jonathan had ever existed. It hadn't. A former employee leaked an internal memo, flagged military profiles for manual review if behavior appears aggressive, unpredictable, or non-compliant. That language wasn't about security. It was about fear. It was about appearances. And on that day at the gate, Colonel Miles didn't fit the narrative they wanted to see. Public outrage wasn't just digital anymore. Protests began forming outside airline terminals in 4 major cities, with signs reading, "Respect our soldiers." No more excuses. We're not boarding until they're respected. The airline offered free military upgrades. It wasn't enough. They changed their military protocol handbook. Still not enough. They sent out apology emails to every service member on file. Too late. The public had already decided, you don't just apologize for this. You fix it. You feel it. You remember it. When Jonathan finally returned to his home in Henderson, Colorado, his front steps were covered in letters, not media envelopes, handwritten cards, from Gold Star families, from veterans, from children. One from an 8-year-old boy in Tennessee read, "Thank you for not giving up. I want to be a soldier like you." Jonathan read that one twice, and then folded it carefully into the drawer next to his medals. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it for the same reason he laced his boots every morning at 5:45 a.m. Because someone has to stand when others won't. As the week faded, the digital storm moved on, as storms do. But for everyone who stood in Terminal C that day, something lingered. Not just a headline, not just a hashtag, but a moment of collective clarity. The crowd that once stood silent in line had learned something. That silence lets injustice survive, and that sometimes the most powerful act of defiance is simply refusing to move. Colonel Jonathan Miles never told his side of the story. He didn't need to, because in a world rushing to speak, his silence had already said everything. The way he stood, the way he refused to be shaken, the way he treated a wooden casket with more humanity than 3 corporate managers combined. People remembered that. The airline rebranded the following month, a new ad campaign, a logo refresh, a tagline about duty and honor. But no one forgot, because this wasn't just a public relations mistake. It was a national reckoning, a reminder that in moments of pressure, the real values of a country rise or vanish. Across the country, airport terminals changed, quietly. At least 4 major airlines revised their policies around military transport escorts. TSA agents received new training. Gate agents were briefed on respect protocol because now it had a name. Colonel Miles had become an unspoken case study in corporate meetings. Don't be that headline. Remember Gate C. But for Jonathan, that wasn't the point. Weeks later, he visited Adam Reese's gravesite. No cameras, just grass, wind, and the sound of flags rippling above rows of stone markers. He knelt, not as a colonel, but as a man who had once watched a 19-year-old recruit fall asleep during a desert briefing because he'd pulled night watch for someone with a twisted ankle. That was Adam. Bright, unassuming, brave in ways he didn't understand yet. Jonathan placed a challenge coin at the base of the headstone, pressed 2 fingers to the edge of the marble, and whispered something no microphone would ever catch. Then he stood. Mission complete. But the echo didn't fade. Veterans began sharing their own stories. Times when they were overlooked, mistreated, doubted, dismissed, and something shifted, not just in policy, but in awareness. Because what happened in Terminal C was not a fluke. It was a mirror. And 1,000,000 people saw something in that reflection they didn't like. Somewhere in a living room in Indiana, a father watched the story unfold on TV, hand over heart. Somewhere in Florida, a teenage boy looked at his ROTC uniform and stood a little straighter. Somewhere in Seattle, a woman finally told her daughter what her husband went through when he came home from Iraq. Not during the war, but after. And in Colorado, Jonathan Miles returned to the life he had before: yard work, daily jogs, a slow-cooked Sunday meal. He still didn't speak to the press. He still declined interviews. But he kept every letter he received, every note from a stranger who said, "Because of you, I said something. I did something." Because that was the real mission now. This story isn't about going viral. It's not about headlines or hashtags. It's about respect and how fragile it becomes when we rely on systems to preserve it. Respect should never depend on rank, uniform, or public pressure. It should be the starting point, not the reward for going viral. Colonel Jonathan Miles didn't ask for recognition. He asked for one thing: dignity for the dead, and honor for the living who carry them home. That shouldn't have to trend. It should already be truth. Sometimes dignity shows up not with speeches, medals, or ceremonies, but in a man who chooses to stand quietly, even when he's being wronged. In a Marine who speaks up without yelling. In a teenage girl who starts recording, not for fame, but because she knows this isn't right. In strangers at Gate C who put down their boarding passes and picked up their voices. This wasn't about a flight. It wasn't even just about one fallen soldier. It was about something we're all responsible for protecting. The idea that no one's worth should depend on whether anyone's watching. Respect shouldn't arrive after 1,000,000 views. It should be there in the silence, When a man in uniform walks into a room and expects nothing except basic human decency. Because the truth is, dignity isn't earned by uniform. It's revealed by how we treat those who wear it. And justice. It starts the moment someone decides not to stay quiet. So when you see someone being pushed aside, overlooked, or denied their place, don't wait for the cameras. Don't hope someone else will act. Be the voice that says, "Not this time." Because that's what Colonel Jonathan Miles taught us. He didn't raise his voice, but he made the whole country listen. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of someone you've loved, someone you've lost, or someone you still hope gets treated with the dignity they deserve, then don't let that feeling slip away. Leave a comment. Tell us what part touched you most. Share it with someone who believes in quiet courage, in justice, in standing tall even when no one's looking. And if these stories matter to you, subscribe. Tap the bell. We share stories like this, not to entertain, but to remember what truly matters. Because the more we speak up, the harder it becomes for the world to look away. So thank you for being part of this moment. Thank you for standing with us even from the other side of the screen. We'll be back with more stories worth telling. Until then, honor the quiet, stand for what's right, and never, ever underestimate the power of simply not walking away.